He paid for a seat. They dragged him off the plane like he was nothing. What they didn't know? He was the billionaire who owned half the airline, and with one phone call, he brought the entire company to its knees. It was a humid afternoon in late July when Harold Whitman boarded a Pacific West Airlines flight out of Houston, Texas. At 73, Harold was a retired tech executive known in certain circles for his quiet generosity and brilliant mind. Dressed in khakis, a polo shirt, and a worn Astros cap, he looked like any other retiree flying to Phoenix to visit his granddaughter for her birthday. The gate had been chaotic. Delays, seat shuffles, and overbooking had passengers grumbling. But Harold didn't complain. He just waited patiently and scanned the terminal with an easy smile. When his boarding group was called, he stepped forward, handed over his ticket, seat 14C, and walked onto the plane with a gentle nod. But when Harold reached his seat, a flight attendant approached. "Sir, there's been a change," she said, offering a forced smile. "We had to move some passengers around to accommodate a crew member. We need this seat." Harold blinked. "I was assigned 14C. I checked in hours ago." "Yes, but unfortunately, we're at full capacity now, and someone has to give up their seat. We're asking for volunteers, but it's your seat we need." Harold's brows knit. "I'm sorry, I can't give up this seat. I have a family event, and I've already boarded." Another attendant stepped in, more firm this time. "Sir, please don't make this difficult. You need to deplane." "No," Harold said quietly. "I'm not causing trouble. I just want to get to Phoenix like I planned." The crew didn't wait. Within minutes, airport security was called. Two uniformed officers arrived and approached Harold with little patience. What began as a request quickly turned aggressive. Before any of the passengers could intervene, the officers grabbed Harold by the arms and forcibly removed him from his seat. His cap fell to the aisle as other passengers gasped and pulled out their phones. Cries of, "Hey, he's an old man!" and "This is wrong," echoed in the cabin. Harold was dragged off the plane, his elbows scraping the metal threshold. Cameras recorded every second. The plane took off 20 minutes later, without Harold. Back in the terminal, he sat on a bench, quietly dialing a number. No yelling, no fuss. Just a calm voice that said, "It's Harold. I need you to do something for me." He hung up and looked out the window as his plane disappeared into the sky. What no one knew, not the flight attendants, not the passengers, not even the airline execs, was that Harold Whitman was more than just a kindly old man. He still held majority voting shares in a holding company that quietly controlled a large stake in Pacific West Airlines. And with that one call, a storm was already beginning to form. The next morning, Pacific West Airlines' corporate headquarters in Dallas buzzed with routine activity. Executives sipped espresso, analysts refreshed stock tickers, and HR filtered through applications for new flight attendants. Business as usual until the phone started ringing. At first, it was just murmurs, a few angry voicemails, a handful of calls from news outlets, and an internal message from public relations flagged as urgent. A grainy video had surfaced online, shot on a passenger's phone, showing an elderly man being dragged off a plane by security. It was spreading, fast. By 10 a.m., the video had over 2 million views. Justice for Harold was trending. Cable news picked it up next. The clip ran on every major network, replaying Harold's stunned expression and the cold efficiency with which he was removed. Analysts and commentators pounced. Elder abuse, corporate cruelty, systemic failures in customer service. In the corner office on the 21st floor, Pacific West CEO Diane Marlowe stared at her tablet, expression hardening with each replay. "Who the hell is this man?" she barked to her assistant. "Harold Whitman, retired, booked the flight to Phoenix." Nothing unusual on the surface. But just then, a junior legal advisor sprinted in, face pale. "You're going to want to see this," he said, placing a file on Diane's desk. It was a document listing the shareholder structure of a shell company known as Northbridge Equity Holdings. Buried in that document, highlighted in yellow, was Harold Whitman's name. The man they forcibly removed from their aircraft wasn't just a passenger. He was the silent backbone of one of their largest investors. "Oh no," Diane whispered, the color draining from her face. "What have we done?" At the same time, Harold was sitting in his modest home office in Sugar Land, Texas. He didn't own a mansion or drive a flashy car. Despite his fortune, he'd always kept things simple. But now, watching the media storm unfold on his flat screen, Harold had a decision to make. His phone rang. It was Marcy, his longtime assistant from his days at WitTech, the AI company he'd sold a decade ago. "You want to pull the trigger?" she asked, voice calm. Harold paused. "How's the board reacting?" "They're panicked. Stocks already dropped 7% in early trading. If you instruct Northbridge to divest, the hit will be brutal." Harold exhaled slowly. He didn't want revenge, but he'd been humiliated, treated like a disposable nuisance. And worse, it was a sign of how companies forgot the people they served. "Start the process," he said. "Liquidate the holdings. All of it." Marcy nodded. "You got it." Within minutes, Northbridge Equity Holdings initiated the sale of their $4.1 billion stake in Pacific West Airlines. Trading desks noticed immediately. Brokers questioned the move. Panic set in. Shareholders began dumping stock, and the company's value began to nosedive. Harold leaned back in his chair. This wasn't about power, it was about accountability, and the world was watching. By noon, Pacific West Airlines was in freefall. The New York Stock Exchange floor was abuzz. Traders glanced nervously at the plummeting line on Pacific West's chart. The ticker, PWA, was blinking red, down 13%, then 18%. Before long, it passed 22%, triggering internal alarms. Financial analysts scrambled for answers. Who was selling this aggressively, and why? The answer became clearer when Bloomberg broke the story. Harold Whitman, elderly man dragged from flight, is key stakeholder in Pacific West parent firm. The headline swept across financial news sites and social media like wildfire. More damning than the viral video was the revelation that Harold wasn't just a passenger, he was someone. A major shareholder, a philanthropist, a quiet billionaire with controlling interests in several American conglomerates. Diane Marlowe, still in her office at Pacific West headquarters, stared blankly at the television. She'd just finished an emergency call with the board, and it had not gone well. "They want blood," said her CFO, pacing across the room. "They're talking class action exposure, calls for your resignation, and worse, they want to know why security didn't follow protocol." Diane's jaw clenched. Because no one checked. Because someone treated an elderly man like a piece of luggage and tossed him aside. Now we're bleeding. Outside the corporate bubble, reporters camped at Harold's quiet suburban home. They tried to push through the gates of Northbridge's Manhattan offices. Everyone wanted a comment, a statement, a soundbite. Harold stayed silent. Instead, his actions spoke louder. By the end of the day, Northbridge's total divestment was complete. $4.1 billion in shares had been sold or moved out of Pacific West portfolio. It was a full financial withdrawal, and it sent a chilling message. If you don't treat people with dignity, don't expect them to keep your business afloat. But not everyone inside Pacific West was blind to the storm's meaning. 30-year-old flight attendant Jenna Fields, who'd witnessed the incident from the galley, posted a heartfelt message on her private social account. "I saw what happened to that man. We failed him. He was kind, calm, and didn't deserve what happened. I was told to stay out of it, but silence is complicity. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman. You deserved better." The message went viral. Thousands of employees began sharing similar sentiments, some anonymously, some openly. Former passengers recounted their own horror stories with Pacific West: overbooking, poor treatment, racial profiling. By the end of the third day, public trust in the airline had all but evaporated. A special segment on 60 Minutes detailed the company's fall from grace, and by week's end, Pacific West had lost 31% of its market value. That translated to over $6.5 billion in shareholder equity wiped out. But in his quiet kitchen in Texas, Harold didn't feel triumph. He felt sadness. "I didn't want this," he told his daughter Rebecca, who had come by with his granddaughter. "All I ever asked for was a seat I paid for. A little respect." Rebecca nodded, pouring him coffee. "Sometimes you have to shake the world a little, Dad, so it remembers what respect looks like." By Monday morning, the Pacific West board had reached its breaking point. An emergency shareholder meeting was called. streamed live to the press, stakeholders, and any interested member of the public. The boardroom in Dallas was packed, but the atmosphere was suffocating. Suits shuffled in silence, and every pair of eyes fell on CEO Diane Marlowe as she took her place at the head of the long conference table. "We must act decisively," said Chairman Leonard Grayson, tapping his finger against a thick folder. "This isn't just about stocks. This is about integrity and survival." Diane's voice, usually crisp and confident, came out flat. "I understand. You've lost the trust of our passengers, the market, and our people," Grayson continued. "Effective immediately, the board is requesting your resignation." Diane didn't argue. She nodded once, stood up, and walked out, leaving behind the crumbling company she once commanded. Meanwhile, Pacific West's newly appointed interim CEO, a soft-spoken but sharp executive named Trevor Langston, took the reins, his first act issuing a formal public apology. Standing before a sea of reporters, Langston addressed the nation. "We failed Mr. Harold Whitman. We failed our passengers. What happened on Flight 227 was unacceptable. On behalf of Pacific West Airlines, I offer a personal and unconditional apology to Mr. Whitman and his family." The apology aired across major networks, accompanied by new footage. This time, a young journalist had found an old clip of Harold at a tech conference in the early 2000s. In it, Harold passionately described building companies that put people first. The contrast with his recent treatment was painful. Back at his home, Harold watched the statement in silence. His granddaughter Ellie, now beside him, looked up. "Are they saying sorry, Grandpa?" Harold smiled faintly. "Yes, they are. Are you going to forgive them?" Harold looked out the window at the garden he'd spent the past 10 years cultivating after retirement. He didn't answer right away. "They're trying," he said at last. "That's a start." But public rage wasn't easily soothed. Several Pacific West board members were named in lawsuits, and consumer advocacy groups launched campaigns demanding federal investigations into airline overbooking policies. In Washington, lawmakers picked up the scent. A bipartisan group began pushing a passenger rights and accountability bill, nicknamed Whitman's Law, meant to protect travelers from abuse by airlines and airport security. Suddenly, Harold's name was no longer just trending, it was being etched into legislation. And Harold? He remained out of the spotlight. Reporters continued to flood his mailbox with interview requests, but he declined them all. He wasn't interested in publicity. What mattered to him was that people had woken up, but not everyone was ready to move on. Behind closed doors at Northbridge Equity Holdings, Marcy handed Harold a thick folder. "These are offers," she said. "Competing airlines, media groups. Everyone wants your attention now." Harold didn't even open the folder. "I'm not looking to profit off this," he said. "Let them come to their own conclusions. My message was loud enough." He leaned back, a quiet resolve in his expression. There was still more to come. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the black SUV pulled into Harold Whitman's driveway. He was in his garden trimming rose bushes when he heard the tires crunch the gravel. Wiping his hands on a towel, he stood up, expecting it to be a neighbor or maybe another persistent reporter. Instead, a tall man in a navy blazer stepped out. He looked to be in his early 40s, sharp haircut, polished shoes, the kind of man who spent more time in conference rooms than the outdoors. "Mr. Whitman," the man said, approaching slowly, "I'm Trevor Langston, interim CEO of Pacific West Airlines." Harold blinked. "You've got guts showing up here." Langston nodded. "I figured you'd say that, but I wanted to come in person. No cameras, no PR team, just me." Harold studied him for a long moment before gesturing to the patio. "All right, you came this far. Let's sit." They took seats beneath the shade of an oak tree. Langston looked around at the peaceful yard. Beautiful place. Hard to imagine it's the home of the man who shook the entire aviation industry last week. Harold chuckled dryly. "Wasn't my goal." "I know," Langston replied, "and that's why I'm here, not to salvage the company's reputation. That's our mess to clean up. I came to ask how we fix this the right way." Harold raised an eyebrow. "And you think I have the answer? You've run companies with heart. Your employees loved you. Your customers were loyal. I've read every article on WITTech. I know how you operated. Harold leaned back. "You want advice?" Langston nodded. "Not a favor, not forgiveness, just advice." Harold was quiet for a moment, then spoke. "Start by treating people like people, not data points. No more dragging, paying customers off planes. No more hiding behind policy when common sense is screaming in your face." Langston listened, nodding. "And you've got to change the culture. Empower your employees to do the right thing, even when it costs a little more or takes a little longer." "You'd be willing to help me get there?" Langston asked. Harold gave a soft laugh. "I'm retired, Trevor. I'm supposed to be spending my days with my granddaughter, not saving corporate America." "But you're already doing it," Langston replied, without trying. Harold didn't answer. He simply stood, stretched his back, and offered a hand. "You've got one shot. Don't waste it." Langston took his hand. "Thank you." As the SUV pulled away, Harold's daughter stepped onto the porch. "What was that about?" Harold smiled. "A man trying to do the right thing. We'll see if he means it." That night, Pacific West's website updated with a new section titled Our Promise to You. It outlined sweeping policy changes. No more involuntary removals, improved passenger protections, and an ombudsman office led by independent advisors, including retired executives with reputations for integrity. Harold's name wasn't mentioned, but his fingerprint was everywhere. Within a week of the policy overhaul at Pacific West Airlines, other airlines began to take notice. Not out of inspiration, but fear. Investor confidence had been shaken across the industry. Major carriers like Skyline, Jetstream, and Aerovista rushed emergency meetings, trying to assess their own exposure. If a single mishandled situation could cost a company billions, every CEO knew they were one incident away from disaster. The aviation industry wasn't just watching Harold Whitman's story unfold, they were bracing for their own. Meanwhile, back in Sugarland, Harold had finally turned his phone off. The media had shifted to covering Whitman's Law, the proposed federal bill mandating customer protection policies for airlines. He watched from a distance as senators from both parties lined up behind it. No more vague disclaimers, no more fine print. Passengers would have real rights now. But even as the world moved on, Harold couldn't quite shake the image of that day. The humiliation, the forceful hands on his arms, the disbelief in the eyes of the passengers who watched him get dragged away like a criminal. It wasn't about money. He had more than he'd ever spend. It wasn't about revenge. That path always led nowhere. It was about memory, a reminder to himself and to others that silence was dangerous, that you had to stand your ground, even if you stood alone. That evening, as he sat reading on his porch, a knock came at the door. Rebecca opened it. A woman stood there, maybe mid-30s, her hair in a bun, her eyes tired but sincere. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said nervously. "I'm Jenna Fields. I was one of the flight attendants on that day." Harold looked up from his chair, surprised. "Come in." Jenna stepped inside slowly. "I didn't do enough. I froze. I knew what was happening was wrong, but they told us to stand down. I've thought about it every day since." "You spoke out," Harold replied. "That matters more than you think." She sat across from him, tears forming. "I wanted to quit, but I stayed because I thought maybe I could help make things better from the inside. Then they made those changes, and I think you're the reason." Harold gave her a soft smile. "You're the reason, too. You had the courage to speak when others stayed silent. That's how change starts." They talked for an hour about the airline, about leadership, about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. When Jenna left, she thanked him, not just for what he'd done, but for listening. That night, Harold wrote a letter, not to Pacific West, not to the press, but to his granddaughter Ellie. In it, he explained what had happened in simple terms, how he was treated unfairly, how he stood his ground, and how doing the right thing sometimes meant walking away from comfort to speak up for yourself and for others. He ended it with a line she would carry with her forever. "Never underestimate the quiet power of doing what's right, even when the world tells you to sit down." 3 months later, the world had shifted. Whitman's Law had passed in Congress with overwhelming support, bringing a new era of accountability to the airline industry. Every airport now had clearly posted passenger rights, independent ombudsman, and a federally mandated hotline. Airlines scrambled to retrain staff, rewrite protocols, and re-earn public trust. But Harold Whitman didn't watch the news that day. He was in Phoenix, ironically the city he'd been trying to reach before everything unfolded. This time, there were no complications, no delays, no security dragging him out. In fact, when he arrived at the airport, he was quietly ushered through with a smile and a handshake from a Pacific West gate agent who clearly recognized him but never said a word. Harold appreciated that. He was in town for a different kind of meeting, not with executives, not with reporters, but with the board of a local nonprofit that provided scholarships to underprivileged students. For years, he'd supported them anonymously, never seeking recognition. But today, he was making one final contribution, large enough to fund the program for the next decade. After the meeting, he sat on a bench near the university campus and watched students pass by. Backpacks slung over shoulders, earbuds in, eyes bright with ambition. This, he thought, was what really mattered. Back in Sugarland, his granddaughter Ellie found a new package on the front porch. It was a slim box, neatly wrapped in plain paper with a handwritten note taped on top. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The note read, "Dear Ellie, one day someone will treat you unfairly. They may ignore your voice, make you feel small, or tell you your place isn't at the table. When that day comes, I want you to remember what your old grandpa did. Not because I want praise, but because I want you to know you have the power to stand up. Not with fists or money, with truth. Use this journal to write your own story. Make it one worth telling. With love, Grandpa Harold." That same day, Trevor Langston unveiled the new Pacific West Passenger Center in Dallas, renamed the Harold Whitman Lounge. Not flashy or first class, but open to all travelers who needed help, rest, or assistance. A small plaque hung near the entrance, dedicated to the passenger who reminded us what leadership looks like. Harold never attended the ceremony. He didn't need to. His work was done. In the end, it wasn't the billions he pulled or the headlines he made that defined him. It was the quiet ripple of dignity he left behind. In a world rushing to cut corners, Harold had forced it to pause, think, and change. And somewhere in a small Texas town, an old man sat on his porch with a cup of tea and a calm heart, knowing that just once the little guy didn't just win, he rewrote the rules. Harold Whitman's story reminds us that integrity, courage, and a single act of resistance can ripple through an entire system. In an age where people are often treated like numbers, standing up for what's right can spark real, lasting change. If this story moved you, share it. Speak up when something's wrong. Treat people with dignity, always, because sometimes the quietest voice becomes the loudest lesson.